One of those people was a person with MS who was in a wheelchair. And she said, what have I got to lose? The drugs aren't working. And within 6 weeks, she was walking with a cane and went on to improve from there.
Have you been diagnosed with MS and you're looking for more answers outside your typical medical system? You are not alone. Hi, I'm Adrienne. I'm a nutritionist and a certified integrative nutritional health coach. And I became interested in holistic health because I reversed my own MS symptoms over 10 years ago. Yes, reversing MS is possible. I'm living proof along with so many others. And I enjoy helping others reverse their symptoms too. Are you ready to learn a few things today? I am. Let's dive in. I just want to pop in real quick and let you know I have a masterclass coming up. It's all about how to reverse your MS, how to alleviate your symptoms. So go ahead and sign up. It's free. And if you can't make it, sign up anyway because I'll send you the recording afterwards. So go to nourishyourway.com/master-class and sign up, and I'll see you there. I've got Dr. Bill Rawls with me today, and I'm so excited to chat with him because he helps a lot of people with chronic and autoimmune conditions. And he's in North Carolina, I'm in Colorado, but just like me, he helps people online, and which is a great place to be, right? So welcome, Dr. Rawls.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I'm so excited that you agreed to join me today because I think you've got a lot of deep smarts, and I want you to share, a little bit more about your background, how you became where you're at today, and then a little bit about how you kind of got into the more holistic field.
Sure. Yeah, but by accident, like a lot of people. And I'm not smart. I just ask a lot of questions and then I start digging for the answers. And that's taken me to very different places. But this year, 2025, is a milestone in that I graduated from medical school 40 years ago, 1985. So it's hard to believe it's been that long, but I have been doing this for a while. I graduated from medical school, went into obstetrics and gynecology because it was dealing with healthier populations who weren't chronically ill. I didn't gravitate toward management of chronic illness early on because I didn't see people getting well. They were just keeping them alive. And OBGYN was much more refreshing. It was bringing life into the world. But way back then, the penalty of doing OBGYN is that you had night call every second to third night for labor and delivery in hospital. And that meant for me, for if somebody was in the hospital or in labor, I was awake, and typically when I was on call, I might squeak by with 4 or 5 hours of sleep if I was lucky. But plus, on top of that, I wanted to do life, There was so much going on in life with community and outside activities. And so I tried to squeeze that in. And so even when I wasn't on call, the thing that got shorted was sleep. And I could do that in my 30s. But by my late 40s, it was starting to catch up with me. And my body started breaking down. By age 47, I had to stop doing obstetrics and let that career go. But didn't really know what was wrong because it wasn't, like I just stopped doing calls so I could sleep again and everything got back to normal. Everything in my body started breaking down. I had significant cardiac symptoms. My joints were falling apart. My gut was a wreck. And I couldn't sleep. Even when I was allowed to sleep, I couldn't sleep anymore. I lost the ability to sleep. I had a lot of neurological symptoms, and I had a lot of symptoms that would be defined as in line with MS. But, the testing said, well, no, you don't really have MS. You don't have anything else. And I finally ended up with a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, which, if you know that diagnosis, it gets you medications for symptoms and not that's about it.
Don't they all? Don't they
Yep.
all? Like
So,
most autoimmune diseases have, some
right.
sort of medication that goes with it.
Sure. So I was in this place of just being stuck. And so I started looking for alternatives. I became certified in holistic medicine. I started reading and kept asking that question, why am I not getting well? What's going on in my body? I changed my diet. I changed my lifestyle. I was working on getting my sleep back. Why wasn't I getting better? Got some better, but still I was working at like a 50% level and my body was still falling apart. I kept asking that question, could it be a microbe? And I kept hearing about chronic Lyme disease. Could it be that?
Uh-huh.
And tested initially, and the tests were negative. Later, I found out I was carrying some of these microbes, gravitated toward that diagnosis like so many people with chronic symptoms, because if you get that diagnosis, then you can take antibiotics and get well, right?
Uh-huh.
But I took antibiotics and I didn't get well. In
Mm.
fact, they made me worse. And just by default, I was in a situation where I was still having to manage a practice. I'd started a primary care practice and that didn't require the same kind of night call. But, I had financial constraints. I couldn't leave town, so I couldn't go see specialists, Lyme doctors, that sort of thing. And I read about an herbal protocol that people had used for Lyme disease and had gotten well. I was pretty open-minded, but at the same time, I didn't have very high expectations.
Dr. Rawls, how did you find out that you had Lyme's disease?
Roundabout, I had been kind of limping along for several years, doing the best that I could and working on, things that were logical, looking at causes of disease, cleaning up my diet, trying to get my sleep, trying to exercise the best I could. I had been working out, clearing some brush in the yard, and I had been getting better up until that point. Those things were helping me. But and this was after the Lyme test was negative, I, for a week, started getting a recurrence of symptoms. Things were getting worse again, and I couldn't figure out why. And I had this sugar bite on my rear end and thought, it's just a sugar bite. He's working in the yard. And at the end of the week, I picked off a little scab, and darn if it wasn't a little tick. And that ended up being the classic bullseye rash, which is pretty much, that's it. That and it's Lyme disease. Later, the testing was positive. So that keyed me into, well, maybe it had been Lyme disease all along. Tried the antibiotics, several rounds of different kinds of antibiotics until nobody would give me antibiotics anymore, which was appropriate. But I didn't know anything, And that's when, out of desperation, I turned to the herbal therapy, thinking, well, if the herbs actually kill these microbes, these bacteria in my system, they're going to wreck my gut and make me sick like the antibiotics. That didn't happen. My gut got better. I got better. And over the course of 6 months, I got about 70% better. After that, it was kind of stalled. It was hard to get those symptoms. And I had some really bad cardiac symptoms too, and the neurological symptoms were really bad. So I worked the herbs, I used different herbs, and gradually, over about a 5-year period, all of the symptoms resolved 100%. And I've been taking herbs continually since then. Over the past decade, so that's another milestone. That was 20 years ago that I was going through that. Over the past decade, I've experienced some of the best health that I've had during my whole life. So
I can relate.
Yeah. So
all right. So tell us, how did you figure out what kind of herbs were right for you to help you? Did you just try them out here and there? Or?
Then I didn't know anything at that point. I read a book by an herbalist named Stephen Booner who laid down some work. He looked at herbs that had antimicrobial properties that had been historically used for other spirochetes like syphilis. The Borrelia is a spirochete of Lyme. Well, there are other spirochetes. There are a lot of other diseases out there that are caused by spirochetes. So he looked at herbs that had been used and been beneficial, lopped together a protocol with those things, and that became the initial protocol. And it's, we're still using some of those herbs. It's been heavily modified, and I've been a long way in the past 20 years since then. There are a lot of herbs that would work, actually, and most herbs have antimicrobial properties. So it's not as specific as you might think. So the things that you hear about working well for Lyme disease are the things that we know the most about, and we have the biggest track record over the past 2 decades with. So not to say, it's like, and I still use a lot of those same herbs, and I still recommend them readily. And since then, they've been studied by Johns Hopkins University and other institutions and found to be as effective as doxycycline and other antibiotics for the Lyme bacteria and co-infections. But if you told me I couldn't use any of those herbs tomorrow, they disappeared, they were gone, I would say, okay, I've got another list that's really good, So there are a lot of really great herbs out there, but the ones that we're currently using the most are the things that we know the most about.
Yeah, so if you have somebody who is coming to you with an autoimmune disease, let's say you had fibromyalgia, is that something that you said that you were struggling with as well?
It's a diagnosis, it's a name.
It is a name, yes.
It's a name that fits a specific group of symptoms, and pretty much anybody with chronic Lyme and fibromyalgia, well, their symptoms overlap them almost exactly.
Yeah,
and
same with MS.
And make it just a little bit more, then you can call it MS. So
yeah. We were talking about that a little bit. So explain that. Talk about how a diagnosis name is just really a name.
A diagnosis, I don't think in terms of a diagnosis in chronic illness anymore. I want to know why the patient is ill. I want to know what's going on in their lives and really piece together the whole picture. So when you look at a diagnosis, you have to understand that our entire medical system is built around acute intervention. It always has been. And with acute intervention, a specific diagnosis is very, very important. So if someone breaks their leg, you want to know which leg, where it's broken, how badly it's broken, so you can go in and fix it properly. You have somebody with a blocked coronary artery, you need to know which one and where so getting that specific diagnosis is really important. But when you look at the concept of diagnosis in chronic illness, it's not one thing going wrong, it's everything in the body going wrong all at once.
Yeah.
So you're not treating the causes anymore. You're treating the manifestations, the symptoms. You're treating inflammation. You're treating the symptoms. So when you look at drug therapy, all drugs treat manifestations of illness. They can block inflammation. They can block symptoms. They can block other things going on to help ease the pain of that particular illness. And so we try to treat chronic illness very, very specifically. And if if everything's going wrong all at once, you end up on a lot of different drugs you're basically plugging holes in a leaky dam, but you're not fixing the structure.
Yeah.
So what I've done in the past 20 years is really ask that question, why is the person ill? What are the root causes? What is going on here? And very interestingly, when I do that, I start coming back to very similar in root causes. And basically, what it boils down to is the root causes of every chronic illness are virtually the same. And we have different chronic illnesses because people have different genetics. They tolerate different stress factors differently. And those factors, like microbes and other factors, can come together differently to cause a particular syndrome, a particular pattern of symptoms in others. But when you start getting to the root causes, if you start understanding why the patient is sick, that's when you start solving their problem.
So what questions do you ask your patients?
Always the first one is, what was happening in your life? What was your life like before you had any symptoms, before you were sick? Because that's the starting point. And sometimes that goes all the way back to childhood. So symptoms are defining what's going on in the body. They're giving us a lot of information, actually more information than any lab can give us. Our body is made of cells. Everything that happens in the body is due to cellular actions. So if you have a symptom, it's related to cellular dysfunction, right? So looking specifically at the symptoms associated with multiple sclerosis, we know there's demyelination of nerves. So what does that mean? This audience is probably very aware that the nerves have to be insulated. So there's a substance called myelin, and that substance exists inside a specific kind of cell. So the cell in the brain, it's called an oligodendrocyte. In the peripheral nervous system, it's called a Schwann cell. That cell wraps itself around the nerve and basically insulates it like you would put plastic on a copper wire. So if you have a bunch of nerves together, they don't get shorted out. So what's happening in MS is there's some damage to the nerve itself, but it's more damage to those nerve sheaths and the myelin. When you disrupt that insulation, then you get all kinds of crazy symptoms. And so, but it's a specific cell type that is giving us that symptom. So no matter what the symptom is, you can trace it to whatever cells are in the body are being affected. So I think that's kind of the first step, is figuring out, where the body is being affected. But of course, I said that, whether it's MS or chronic Lyme or fibromyalgia or anything else, it's not one symptom, it's lots of different symptoms.
So what is your game plan when somebody comes with you with MS, for example? And you ask all these questions, what was your life like? And then they tell you they start getting symptoms, maybe numbness, maybe brain fog, fatigue is a big one, optic neuritis is a big one.
Sure.
So how do you go from there?
There are basically 5 categories of stress factors, and I go through this list.
Okay.
So the first is diet. What is their diet like? And you can really define this by looking at cells. If you want to understand something, break it down to its smallest functional unit, and that is a living cell. So we have trillions of cells in the body, about 200 different cell types. Every cell has a different job, but every cell came from one cell. So they differentiated into all the different cells in our body. So they basically structurally very similar. And even though, it's like our heart isn't as much a unit as it is a composite of billions of heart cells that are working in synergy. But every one of those heart cells is an individually functioning unit. You can think about them as little microscopic machines. And every machine has operating requirements. So that gives us our causes right there. So first on the list, for cells to function, they need the right nutrients. And nutrients are to not only to generate energy, but also rebuild parts and do their job. Different cells may need different nutrients, like our thyroid cells need iodine to produce thyroid hormone. Other cells, our heart cells, run predominantly on fat because of that slow, steady burn. Our brain likes carbohydrate a bit better. To get all the nutrients your cells need, a diverse whole food diet supplies all of that. So
right. That macronutrient and micronutrient
it's really important.
diet. Yeah.
This is the key to wellness right here.
Yeah.
So eating a diverse whole food diet is a way to nourish all of your cells. That's going to give all the cells the nutrients they need. And as long as they're getting their nutrients, then they're going to be able to function normally. You eat a processed food diet that's heavy in meat and carbohydrates from seeds,
And
you're
chemicals.
shorting your cells. You're overloading them with carbs, and so they're not going to run right.
And toxins. Yes.
Well, second on the list is cells need a clean environment to function properly.
Yes.
And so whether you're talking about mycotoxins that are natural toxins or all the petrochemicals that we're exposed to from fossil fuels, we're bombarded with chemicals that we've never been exposed to. So when you look at our world today, we're using a lot of fossil fuels, petroleum, coal, and these chemicals that once were normal organic chemicals. If you go back several million years and eat the plant matter that became coal or the algae that became petroleum, it'd actually be good for you. But these organic molecules, all the pressure in the earth over millions of years have distorted them to forms that aren't compatible with life anymore. The problem is, though, they're still organic molecules, so they are absorbed into our body very easily. And it gets into our cells, and our cells don't know what to do with them. It basically gums up the machinery, so they don't work as well. So toxic environment, that's a big stress that's hitting a lot of people. Definitely can affect your nervous system and everything else in your body. Number 3 is downtime. This is the one that got me. Your cells need to recover from working. So we're up all day, our cells are working full steam, and they need to recover through a process of autophagy, which you probably are familiar with. Our cells continually repair, but they need downtime for more time to repair, to really to repair all the damage from the just working, the wear and tear. Most of our cells need 8 hours of sleep. And if you don't get it, you start your next day with a deficit. So most people in America are sleeping 6.5 hours. They're starting the day that their cells haven't recovered from the day before, and that's cumulative. And for me, it hit me really hard over time that every cell in my body was breaking down. And that made me susceptible to other kinds of problems. So 3, chronic mental stress and affecting people's sleep, keeping our body in high alert. Our cells don't get to recover. Number 4 is our cells need blood flow. Really important. So the spaces between cells have to be continually flushed with plasma from the bloodstream that delivers nutrients and oxygen and washes away metabolic waste and other buildup of toxins. Those chemicals that we absorb, our cells are constantly trying to purge them. But if those spaces are congested with debris from just stagnation, then it just becomes a very toxic place. So you need to flush that space. And how you do it is you get out and go take a walk or you exercise. So exercise, there are a lot of benefits with exercise, but the big one is increasing blood flow, which flushes our spaces, clears that space so our cells can breathe again. And it clears that junk into the lymphatic system so we can get rid of it. And then the final one is microbes, and that one's huge.
Our microbiome. I didn't even know what that word meant until after I got sick.
Yeah.
So I had to dive into health, and that was one thing that I really learned about. So yeah, continue.
It's even more complicated than you might think.
I'm sure.
Of microbes and infections when we end up with a cold or a flu or something like that. And that's an acute infection of a new microbe. But the fact of the matter is we have an ecosystem. And you talked about our microbiome. When we say that word, people are thinking mostly about the gut or on the skin of microbes that are kind of outside of us, right? So we have bacteria in the gut where we have food, but that's contained inside the intestinal tract. And we have microbes on our outer skin, but that's outside of our tissues and our bloodstream. So it's long been thought, and what I was taught in medical school, that our tissues and our bloodstream are sterile. There are no microbes there unless you get sick. And where my study has carried me, that's just a myth, that this is not true. It turns out that our bloodstream is more like a freeway, and we have microbes that embed themselves in our tissues. And this is happening all through our lifetime. And this is happening with tick bites. It's happening with respiratory infections. It probably starts even before you're born, that microbes cross from your mother through the uterus and the placenta in uterus into your bloodstream and start depositing in your tissues. And this is happening all through life. So these microbes, we call them stealth microbes, they have a different strategy. So like if you get a really bad pneumonia, that microbe is trying to break down the door to bust into your body. And they can make you very sick very quickly because they're growing very fast. But that's not typical. We're exposed to things every single day. Right now, while you and I are talking, things are trickling from our gums, from our GI tract, from our skin into our bloodstream. And these things work by, it's like all of the tick-borne microbes, but so many others. Before we started, we talked about Epstein-Barr virus. So a lot of things don't have the strategy of making us sick. They have the strategy of maintaining a presence in the body. That's all they want to do. And this is true of the tick-borne microbes. People typically don't get sick from an acute tick bite. This is really important. 95% of the people with chronic Lyme disease that I've talked to do not become ill or don't remember becoming ill around the time of a tick bite. Many of them don't even remember a tick bite. So what that tells you is they're getting in the body and they're persisting. So my study over the past decade plus has been studying how they do that. And there are two primary mechanisms that they use. One is very slow growth. The other is being able to exist inside cells. So whether you're talking about Borrelia, the Lyme bacteria, co-infections like Babesia, which is a protozoa, Bartonella, Anaplasma, Rickettsia, so many others, or things that we get from other places. And actually Bartonella we mainly get from pets. Cats are very, very common. And other things like Mycoplasma and Chlamydia. I'm sure you're familiar with connection between chlamydia and MS. We pick these things up when we're children. They maintain a presence in the body. So their strategy is not overwhelming the immune system. Their strategy is getting past the immune system, getting to tissues. And partially how they do that is they don't grow very fast. So they're less of a target. They squeeze by, they invade cells. And if our cells are healthy, brain cells, heart cells, joint cells, a lot of different microbes affect different cells, invade different cells in the body. So they basically are able to invade the cell and evade the cell's ability to kill them or get rid of them. So I mentioned autophagy. Well, another purpose for autophagy is destroying microbes and inviting microbes. So our immune system uses that, but all of our cells in the body have the ability. So these stealth microbes have developed all of these sophisticated ways to evade that and go dormant inside cells.
Okay. So I want to get down to how do herbs, right? Because you're all about herbs. How do herbs help us? Besides diet, besides exercise, besides getting sleep, how can herbs help us recover?
Yeah. Well, let's finish the microbe story a little bit too.
All right.
Okay? All right. So we have these things. We pick them up. Mycoplasma pneumonia, Chlamydia pneumonia, Epstein-Barr virus. We pick all of these things up through life. They invade our cells. And we are fine until our body is stressed. And as we age, we don't eat a good diet. We are exposed to chronic stress factors. We're not sleeping. We become mentally stressed. All of these factors add up. And this is the part of the story that I'm trying to put together, is how these factors came together in the person's life that allowed them to become sick. So when that happens, microbes start to reactivate. And they reactivate wherever they are. Different microbes invade different tissues, right? So there's direct evidence that has been uncovered that Borrelia, the Lyme bacteria, can invade oligodendrocytes and go dormant inside the oligodendrocytes. It's been documented for chlamydia, mycoplasma, Epstein-Barr, and many other microbes. Other microbes like Bartonella, though, it likes invading red blood cells. It doesn't care about oligodendrocytes. So what kind of things you pick up in life matter. So you're fine. Everything is going along and you reach your mid-40s and your life is stressed and you're starting to age a little bit. These things start reactivating. And when they start reactivating, the immune system sees this and goes, oh, this is a real problem. And it starts producing antibodies and attacking the cells, the oligodendrocytes, where those microbes are starting to emerge. This has also been documented for both Lyme disease and multiple sclerosis. So there's a lot of commonality there.
Yeah.
So, and it can wax and wane. It can, but what typically happens is people reach a point where this becomes a self-sustaining process, that the reactivation of microbes that are starting to break down cells in the body are actually causing other cellular stress that's fueling further microbe reactivation. And that's what chronic illness is. And what symptoms a person has depends on where the microbes are reactivating in their body and what kinds of microbes they have. So that should put an image in your mind that it really starts to explain exactly what chronic illness is, what MS is. Yeah. So when you look at the difference between chronic Lyme and MS, it's really a clinical decision. And it depends on whoever is evaluating that person. And it's typically MS patients have more advanced symptoms than a person with chronic Lyme. But that's the only difference. The mechanisms are basically the same.
All right. So let's talk about the herbs.
All right. How you solve this problem is you have to suppress the microbes, so you have these microbes that are reactivating, but they're still growing pretty slow. So antibiotics are not a great way to kill them, because antibiotics disrupt gut flora, and antibiotics generate antibiotic-resistant pathogens, and antibiotics are actually toxic to cells and mitochondria. You can't get well with something that's toxic to your cells. So when we look at herbs, what we're doing is borrowing the defense system of the plant. So all organisms have to have defenses against microbes. Everything. Even bacteria have to defend themselves against viruses and other bacteria. So when we look at an antibiotic, it's a single chemical that we've pulled from nature, some natural source, and typically potentiated it so we can get a patent on it and it's more potent. But it's one chemical, and that's pretty easy for bacteria to get around. And it's also very disruptive to the body. When we take an herb, basically we're taking the plant's defense system. So a plant is using a chemical defense system as opposed to our cellular immune system. And plants solve a lot of problems with chemistry, but it's not a single chemical, it's hundreds or even thousands of chemicals to a wide range of different potential pathogens. But it's selective for pathogens. It doesn't disrupt the gut flora. It doesn't, the plant doesn't want to kill its normal flora that are friendly. It wants to kill pathogens. So it's hitting bacteria, viruses, protozoa, yeast. So you're getting this broad spectrum of coverage. You're not disrupting your normal flora. Antibiotic resistance or resistance hasn't been documented with herbs. And what that means is you can take them for a long time without having to worry about the side effects and ramifications. But aside from that, you also are borrowing the plant's cellular protection system. So herbs have chemicals that are protecting ourselves from free radicals and toxic stress and toxic substances and radiation and all of these kinds of things, plus some of the regulatory chemicals that are helping to balance our stress hormones. So we have these adaptogenic effects. Our herbs help us adapt to stress. So basically, what we're doing is this robust cellular protection system. So when you add that on to a really healthy whole food diet, an environment that's free of chemical toxic substances, adequate rest, and adequate exercise, it's a really powerful combination that fits the problem like a glove.
Okay, so how would somebody with MS, how would they start? They're like, okay, herbs. There's hundreds, right?
There are,
So
yeah.
how would they start?
Yeah, and the things that I talk about don't typically show up at most health food stores. So these are things that are high-grade extracts of herbs that more are well known in the Lyme community, but they really apply to really any of these situations. You know, name a microbe, mycoplasma, Epstein-Barr virus, some of the things that we actually know about. You have pretty broad spectrum coverage, and we've studied them a lot. Again, that's really important. So how good antimicrobial properties a plant might offer or an herb might offer, and this applies to medicinal mushrooms too, depends on the microbe stress in the plant's environment. So it may be different than a plant that is in another location, or how that plant, you know, uses that chemistry to affect those particular microbes. So there are some really nice herbs. Japanese knotweed is one that's commonly cited. That is one that was on the Johns Hopkins studies in 2020 that showed that Japanese knotweed was effective as doxycycline against Lyme microbes and other microbes. Others, Chinese skullcap, another really nice antimicrobial herb. Cat's claw is kind of a classic one. Andrographis isn't as good for Borrelia, but it's a really great antiviral for Epstein-Barr virus and other things. Garlic is good. Ginger is good. Turmeric is good. So you have all of these things together. And our medicinal mushrooms, like reishi mushrooms, have antiviral properties. But all of these herbs are what we define as immune modulators. And that's really important. So they're protecting immune cells. So they're cranking down overactive parts of the immune system, like an exaggerated response to allergic reactions to chemicals. But they are elevating the immune system's ability to go after these intracellular bacteria. So, but the problem is you still don't kill off this reservoir that you have in your tissues. So you have to take them for a long time. But with herbs, you can do that. But the really cool thing is any of those herbs that I have mentioned have adaptogenic problems. They have properties. They help us adapt to stress. They also have anti-cancer properties. Who doesn't need that?
Nice.
So they're really doing a lot of protection.
Have you done any reading on lion's mane?
Lion's mane. Great. Yeah, that's a really good one. We know it increases choline in the brain, so it's really good for helping neurological functions.
Yeah, so I've read that it helps repair the myelin.
Yeah, but it's not the only one. I mean, all of them are doing that. You know, that's the thing I caution people against. Be careful about trying to you know, especially like the test and cure kind of mentality. Picking specific mushroom herbs to do a specific job. You know, what we want to do is look at their healing properties by protecting cells and reducing this microbe stress that's going on of reactivated microbes. So yeah, but lion's mane in particular, that's a good one to add to the mix for sure.
So yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So do you have certain herbs that help different symptoms? Like maybe you have like 10 different herbs for chronic fatigue. Maybe you've got 5 different herbs for brain fog. Maybe you've got, does it kind of work like that?
No,
Explain.
no,
No?
it doesn't.
No.
They're not that specific. I mean, everybody is trying to make it specific. And some aspects, here we're talking about when we expand it to look at all of herbology, right? So when you look at this concept of herbal medicine, it extends all the way from herbs or plants that we would eat as food and culinary herbs, all the way to herbs that have very strong drug-like effects. So plants use a lot of different signaling chemicals. A plant has to adjust its cellular functions depending on changes in the day, changes in weather, and they do that with chemical messengers that are very much like our hormones. It's like caffeine that we get from tea and other sources. That's a chemical that's being used to modify cellular functions in the plant, and it happens to be stimulating. There are a lot of others that are calming. Some of them actually have drug-like effects. Like if you take St. John's wort, it has the same effects as taking Prozac. So toward that end of the spectrum, I call them yellow zone herbs, that they have drug-like effects, and you would use them more for a specific purpose. So in this category, the ones that I'm using mainly, I call green zone herbs because they don't really have drug-like effects. You wouldn't use them to achieve a specific purpose like you would a drug. They're protecting all the cells in your body. And this has been illustrated over and over and over again. So have you ever heard of the herb milk thistle?
I have, yeah.
Okay, it's really great for your liver, right? Along with a lot of other herbs. All of these herbs that I've talked about so far are liver protectants, but we have a reputation for milk thistle because we studied it. So I found a study that found that milk thistle is really good for postmenopausal osteoporosis too. How does it do that? Well, it actually protects the cells in our bones that remodel our bones. So we have better bone function with milk thistle because we're protecting those cells. So milk thistle isn't specific to the liver, it's protecting all the cells in the body. And that's true of all of our different herbs. So when you look at uses, yeah, a little bit like some of our herbs, we know that Japanese knotweed has certain broad spectrum, really good antimicrobial properties. We know that an herb like rhodiola, which is from Siberia, it's an adaptogen, is really good at helping us adapt to physical stress. Well, if you look at the plant, there's not a lot of microbe stress in Siberia. It's a cold, harsh environment, but there's a lot of physical stress. So you would expect that plant would help us more for those things. So a little depends on the plant's environment, but you still are getting broad spectrum protection of cells throughout the body.
Okay.
And that's why it's not diagnosis dependent or as much symptom dependent as you might think.
All right. So how do you prescribe, all these different herbs?
Yeah.
So based on somebody who has told you all their symptoms, and let's say they have MS, right? This is what the show's all about. And they tell you all their symptoms, and of course you go over diet, exercise, mental health, self-care, sleep.
Yeah.
And then do you say, I'm going to suggest you try these 5 herbs first. And then I want to talk to you in a couple of weeks and tell me how you feel. Like, is that kind of an example of how you work, or how do you do it?
Yeah, it's actually, it's a bit easier than that. I mean, everybody needs to clean up their diet, clean up their environment, get better sleep. We all know we need to do that.
Right.
And as far as these healing properties, these herbs from this green zone that I'm talking about, there are a lot of applications. As I said, when you look at the difference between MS and chronic Lyme disease, it's been well documented with people with chronic Lyme have demyelination of nerves. They have neurological symptoms that are very similar to MS. They have all the same things going on, just not to the degree. And the differentiating factor may be genetics. There are genetic mutations where people that have MS that other people don't have, and that may be predisposing fact, but the mechanisms basically the same. So you look at chronic fatigue, it's probably more viral in certain other microbes and less of other, there might be, you don't typically find Borrelia, because chronic fatigue people don't tend to have the arthritis. It all depends on where the microbe is invading in the body, what kind of cells it's affecting. But when you look at these herbs, they have very broad spectrum activity. You have coverage of Epstein-Barr, but a lot of other things that we probably don't even know about yet. I had gravitated toward chronic Lyme. I had been doing all of these herbs and learning these principles that I'm sharing with you had gotten better. I was about 5 years into this, and I started developing a reputation for helping people that were unhelpable, people with various kinds of diagnoses, often autoimmune conditions. And they would come in and I'd put them on this protocol of diet and all of these things with the same herbs that I had been using. One of those people was a person with MS who was in a wheelchair. And she said, what have I got to lose? The drugs aren't working. And in 6 weeks, she was walking with a cane and went on to improve from there. And when you look at this connection of these same microbes find in common different diseases, then you start to realize there's a lot of commonality of these mechanisms of chronic illness. All manifestations of all chronic illnesses are rooted in cellular stress. So basically what we're doing is we're promoting healing at the cellular level. We're doing that by clearing active microbes and suppressing this microbe activity in the body and allowing cells in the body to heal.
I love your story about the woman in the wheelchair, and I've been talking about this on my website. You can heal yourself out of a wheelchair. And a lot of people don't believe that it's possible. And it is. So many people have done it.
Yep.
All right. We're running kind of long here, so I want to wrap it up. Thank you for all your information. But I want you to talk briefly about the books that you have.
Oh, well, my therapy has always been writing. I started by writing a long time ago when I was first going through this journey, and those early patients got everything that I had written down on a CD, and they'd have to go home and put it on the computer and read it. And that became a first book that I wrote mainly for my patients. I've written several others. The more recent is Unlocking Lyme that I wrote in 2017. To look at the problem of chronic Lyme disease differently, and more specifically carrying that knowledge even further with a book called The Cellular Wellness Solution that really goes into that broader concept in greater detail. It's got a lot of content. It's a thick book, but it's like 4 books all in one, and a quarter of the book. One of the books is an herbal primer just to help people understand how to use herbs properly. And knowing that when you look at this green zone herbs, you're talking about things that have a low potential to harm because they don't have drug-like effects. They don't disrupt gut flora, but they have all these wonderful healing properties. So what we're doing with them is promoting healing. It's a good place to start, but the book really details what people have to know. I have a company, vitalplan.com, that we serve high-grade extracts and also protocols and pathways to help people use herbs in their healing journey. And there is rawlsmd.com. And if you put rawlsmd.com/resources, that'll give you information about our latest programs and that sort of thing.
Nice. Well, thank you. And you already spit out your websites, and that's great because I was going to ask you about that. Thank you so much. Is there anything
pleasure.
Is there like a last positive message that you want to give people with MS before we wrap it up?
Yeah, well, what you said, you can heal. I'm just always amazed at the capacity of the body to recover, but you have to create an internal environment that promotes healing at the cellular level. And you can't get that from a doctor's office or anywhere else. That has to come from you. It has to come from inside your body. So that's what healing from chronic illness is all about, is creating an environment inside your body that promotes healing at the cellular level. And when you do that, amazing things happen.
It's true. It's true. Well, you and I are proof of it, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being my guest.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Would you like some support in healing your symptoms? You can totally heal. I've helped people do this. It's possible. So if you want help, reach out. You can email me at info@nourishyourway.com, or you can go to the Work With Me page on my website. And that's nourishyourway.com. And you can get on my program and I'll help you get back to health. Don't wait any longer. You deserve to get your healthy life back.